Hey, folks, welcome back. It's good to have you here. And I'm excited to introduce you to our guest today, Roman. Roman, I'm going to let you say your full name because I can't pronounce your last name.
Angere.
Ungerer.
I mean capital suddenly. Roman Angerer.
Roman Ungerer. And this is a German last name. You're in Germany right now.
It's a German last name, yeah, or sometimes Italian. So it's somewhere in the borderlands,
Okay.
Germany and Italy.
Well, welcome to the show. It's good to have you here. I know we've been talking about doing this for a few months, and I'm excited to introduce you to our audience. Um, you've listened to a few episodes of this show, yeah?
Yeah, I did. I have.
Yeah.
So I'm familiar with
Yeah.
having no actual topic. I think so. We just go with the flow, speak from the ground
Hmm.
of well-being,
Yeah.
tap into the field presence, what's there between us.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, and then I'd add just one thing, which is our audience, just welcoming our audience in here wherever they're listening from in space and time or out of space and time. Um, but yeah, just I say that for myself really because I feel like I could talk to you about a million different things, and then feeling the audience here present with us helps me ground in this being a podcast. So yeah. I felt you most when you said speak from the ground. I'm wondering if you could bring us into the ground more.
So I'm not sure what's your actual definition. So in a deep sense, I heard you speak about it and sensed it a bit. So I normally don't use the word ground, but when I think of ground, I tap into a sort of mystery. So into a place where there is something beyond, but it's no longer comprehensible or perceivable. What's behind it, like a dark veil of nothingness or voidness. And probably from behind it, stuff bubbles up and then moves into our relational domains, either through our bodies, the movement, or our concepts that come up, our social feelings, um, our sense of each other, or more mental stuff like complex concepts where we resonate, the topics we touch in, the meaning we try to generate. And sometimes this likewise can have a more intuitive character, like presence, seeing what's behind all the words and concepts and postures that we show. And yeah, normally I tap into it through meditation.
Mm.
And in such a situation, and I guess that's a concept that you too hold, it feels like a profound parasympathetic response. So it's getting cooler, connecting to peace, to a sense of calmness, relaxation, letting go of what's important at the moment, if there was anything that mattered at all. And then maybe simply having it take over. And what I recognize in this moment, and tapping more into a ground state or into the mystery of void, is a little bit of dysregulation within me, nervousness, and how I can slow down my breathing and settle more. Even so, I feel completely relaxed. And the background or the ground itself feels like complete relaxation and unobstructed silence and peacefulness and bliss. And from this, I can see that my human experience is still nervous. And what about you, Forrest? How do you feel in this moment?
Definitely experiencing a slight state change as you so beautifully transmitted the ground for us here. Feel cooler, calmer, more relaxed. Um, I have several things I want to ask you about. One is curiosity about the nervousness, and if there's anything that, yeah, where the nervousness comes from.
Yeah, first I'm here at the Forrest Wilson experience. So that's something completely novel to me. And I know that you spoke with some quite impressive persons, successful people, people with skills and competency. So there's definitely some sense of comparison going on. Likewise with you as a very skilled and, in a sense, a profound person. So I guess that's much of it that's going on. So
Mm.
the human tendency to compare and wanting to show up perfectly and what is it at, 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 at the same height or whatever it is,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
not falling short of my own capacities, yet not oppressing or disturbing the field and trying to make anyone else small. So there's a need for balance within me. It's a completely new context. So knowing that it's recorded and maybe people will watch it, who will watch it, I have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, the comparison line is it's intriguing because I conceptualize you or judge you as an impressive person. I've always experienced you as impressive, and so there's judgment in that. Uh, yeah, and I know there are ways I compare myself to you, so I like hearing that you name comparison. Yeah. I remember the first time you showed me the developmental model that you have created, and I just remember having this experience of like, wow, this is incredible. Uh, so yeah, I think there's been comparison since that moment.
yeah, it's like, yeah, and that's one domain where I'm very secure. I mean, not necessarily in this context, so I know what I've done intellectually and accomplished, but I mean, it's not all that is in life. So there is much more how we are received, how we support others,
Mm,
how we manage to bring what we feel is our purpose and deepest gifts into reality. And that's something where I'm quite insecure, I would say. So where I see you light years ahead of me, likely. So and some sort of, yeah, one could say different ego states, places where I'm very confident and places where I know that I lack or sometimes feel insufficient as a human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it?
Mm.
You go to different places in your being to flex different capacities, and uh, some muscles feel real big and strong and developed, in other places it's like atrophied. It's like I've never even.
Yeah. Like bodybuilders with like a tall upper body and tiny legs, and they can barely stand.
Yeah.
So I guess there's some inherent tendency to balance the system out, and I guess this nervousness and comparison is part of this, where I recognize, okay, I have to keep up with others, develop myself, learn, feel the pain, feel the nervousness, feel my lack of accomplishment in a sense, and from there try to grow and make the best out of it,
Mhm.
which I just recognized that it's actually the same with model building. So in the domain of model building, I experienced for years the sense of insufficiency, the failure, the testing forward. And when it comes to the actual world, I couldn't make the parallel that it's a similar process and that I have to go through similar learnings and similar pains and similar experiences. And since I somehow connected it, it's getting easier to actually acknowledge the things that are going on.
Yeah, that in and of itself is a capacity needed to just be able to be honest about which muscles need get stronger for us to be
Yeah.
able to be more robust.
Hmm. I mean, it's easy to focus on one's strengths and then show them off and whoa, and yet at the same time missing part of reality.
I'm with the You mentioned bringing our gifts into the world, and I'm with the a few days ago I posted on Facebook this deep deep take on a hot take from Jordan Miska Allen's new platform Uptrust, which I'll link in the show notes for anybody who wants to
Hmm.
try a better social media platform. Uptrusting.com will take you there. I endorse Jordan fully in his new platform. That being said, I posted about kind of the market correction in the coaching industry and
Hmm.
how there have been practitioners and healers and facilitators who are really good at facilitating transformational work and development and awakening, and have not been very good at business building or getting their gifts into the world. And then on the other side, there's been a lot of coaches who have developed a lot of business building capacity, but don't really have a clue how to actually facilitate healthy developmental evolutionary healing work. And so this has resulted in the kind of coaching coaches on selling coaching to coaches thing that has been pretty rampant, and also the real healers and practitioners who can really do good work not sharing their gifts so fully in the world. And I was just writing about the opportunity to share, and you commented on it and shared it. It deeply resonates, and I I hold you in this light of someone who's a really skilled and capable practitioner and facilitator. And um, I just light up hearing you talk about getting your gifts into the world more fully, and wonder how we being Forrest listening, and we being listeners listening to the podcast, and the world can um, experience your gifts more. It feels really fun to ask.
Was this a question directed at me? I'm not sure. But you asked the whole audience, I guess.
Yeah, and if I put myself in an audience member's shoes, I imagine I'm going, okay, here's Forrest. He obviously thinks highly of Roman. Why is that? What's Roman up to? Uh, I'm also just experienced Roman's transmission at the beginning of this, and that was pretty good. So I can feel and tell there's something here, right? So what are you up to, Roman, and how can I get more involved in your world? Asks Forrest the listener.
Listen. Yeah, that's a good question. So currently there is not so much one can get involved into.
Okay.
Because I'm sort of at the threshold of getting things out. Um, and that's why I could very much relate to your question and deep takes on hot takes, as I'm looking and listening in part to advisors that get you marketing. Um, I'm not sure it's not so. They want to give one advice about how to sell oneself and these things, but it often feels like they spent their whole life so much with marketing that they put it on top of anything else. And sometimes don't even see the necessity to develop a product. And so some actually, I'm sure if you're probably familiar with these things, they tell you take one coaching course like for a month and then invest the rest of your life into marketing and become rich. So that's the main message that I hear. And for me, as someone who invested most of my life in developing a model, developing certain skills and practices that actually can support people in their growth, development, and their awakening process, feels deeply unseen by this logic and ideology. And that's definitely in part because it's difficult to look beyond one's own paradigm, beyond one's own domain and discipline. And yet, I think if that's the logic we live in, we will generate a lot of harm and lose a lot of potential progress and opportunities to grow and mature as humans and as a collective humanity.
Mhm.
So, because when I look back and would think how I looked at humans through my sort of spiritual lens or lens as a mentor, and compared today, I would say I completely overestimated my skills in a sense. And even so, I had some skills. They were not actually grounded in some objective criteria. And so, very much of what I did within the last, say, 15 years was finding ways to actually judge how I can support people, how I can measure the outcomes of the support, how the support can work at different levels and layers of the human being, um, integrating not only dialogue but more spiritual means.
Maybe one
Mm.
maybe one thing I can do to help ground it for listeners is so you've created a developmental model. There's many developmental models on how consciousness evolves and how human beings evolve. You've got Suzanne Cook-Reuter's work, you have Terry O'Fallon's work, Ken Wilber's work, and your work, right? I mean, there's other Levenger, right? There's
Mm.
many other developmental
There
models.
are dozens or hundreds of
Exactly,
models,
models.
likely.
You've created one, and you know,
Mm.
we can circle back in a little bit later in the podcast and ask why, right? If there are dozens or hundreds of models, what inspired you to create your own? And we can circle back to that. But for anybody who is listening, there's I'm putting my hand on my heart because I know this in myself, but I think the first thing I would do, Roman, if I was you, is I would give people your website,
Mm.
right? Which I'll link in the show notes. So if anybody wants to find Roman's website, we'll put it in the show notes. And then you can go to his website and connect with Roman. We'll put his contact info in the show notes as well. And one of the things you can do among many things is you can take us an assessment. And so Roman has an assessment that you can take that helps you understand where you are in your evolutionary journey, in your personal evolutionary journey, in your consciousness evolutionary journey. And it can help you understand where you are. It can help you understand where you've been. And it can also help illuminate what else might be available for you in terms of your relationship with your life and your experience and your spiritual journey, for lack of a better way to put it.
Mm.
And so that's one. I mean, there's many ways you can interface with Roman, right? But that might be one. Am I tracking
Yeah,
here?
that's one. That's probably the easiest way to. I mean, if you want to directly engage with me work-wise, it's the easiest way. If not, of course, one can simply ask for a conversation or anything else and speak with each other. So which is the what I do most of the time, speaking with people.
And then
It's,
from, and then from there you run courses. I've seen you market courses and you have
mm,
different offerings of ways that you support people in their development and in their evolution.
yeah, definitely. So currently I have a course running. It's called The Stages of the Pause. So it's a sort of culmination of my work outside of the, let's say, solely developmental psychology oriented realm. So it's not so much based on developmental assessments and not so much on stage theory, but it integrates a lot of the spiritual traditions and my ideas about waking up and yeah, tapping into later states in a very incredible fashion. So we start at the very earliest states and stages, and then we gradually move up into the later ones. And it's a 7 months course that's currently going on. And participants seem to enjoy it, and one can see the growth. So even it's not actually oriented on assessments. I mean, I have a good sense of all the participants, so they have all been assessed in the past at least once. And so through the constant interactions, I can sort of see where they are heading and the topics that show up. And so it's a lot of intertwining with personal contact and coaching sessions as well. At least if the participants want to have this additional attention. And yeah, people seem to grow. So I'm not sure if that's the most important thing. The other thing is that they definitely release old patterns and old stuff and look at themselves in a new way. And the good thing that I personally see is that most of the people are very experienced already. So they all have a lot of meditative experience with various teachers, and the willingness to go deeper. So given that they are all um, 10 to, I guess, 30 years older than me, there's some yet some solidity to their life. So they have gone through most of the topics younger people have to go through still. And so they can basically focus on growth in a different way. So they don't have to build their businesses anymore and their families and these things. So they're not giving up on this dimension of life. So they're still all working on some projects and trying to support the conscious shift in humanity. But it's an honor to work with these people. So when I have less experienced clients, so like in my hometown, when I meet people and we do meditations, they don't have this 10, 20, 30 years of experience. So things are much tougher. So with these people, so when I guide a meditation, I try to sense the people. I try to feel where they are at, where are the blockages in their body, where does the energy flow easily, how are the pathways connected throughout their energy system, and so on. Where do resistances show up? Where do emotions show up? Thoughts show up? And I try to adjust the meditations. And with these people, it's very smooth. It's mostly, okay, we go through the steps and states in the meditation, and then they recapitulate, okay, I've been going through this time and that time, and I learned this new thing about it, and now I can see myself more perfectly and I can navigate better and these things. And so they shift from states to stages likewise as they spend more time within the later realms. But, but in my hometown, it's somehow different, and that's true a new experience because I have worked, I guess, all of my life with people that were much older than me. So there was always at least 10 to 20 years distance. And so I wasn't even aware of how it is with people that have spent less time on their spiritual development. Yeah, so when working with other people, it's oftentimes that one can't even go through the process because there's some knot or blockage at a certain point. And each time one goes one state later, all the stuff bubbles up that hasn't been resolved and intense emotions with the lack of skill to actually handle it themselves. So there's a different degree of care needed. So that's something I recognize lately. So I work outside of my what is it? Commonly experienced studentship. So, but it's a good course if you have some experience. I mean, if not, it's probably something very demanding and challenging. Would need additional support.
Yeah, what I'm hearing and what you're sharing, Roman, is that you have one of your gifts is working with people who have spent a lot of time doing developmental, evolutionary, healing type work,
Mm,
being able to
yeah.
take people who are at the leading edge of consciousness and helping them go even further and even deeper.
That's how I judge it from the perspective of my model.
Yeah, amazing.
Mm,
Just tremendous. Yeah, amazing. I'm curious for you personally how, I mean, as you mentioned, right, each time we go to a later state or a later stage, whatever we haven't resolved from the previous or earlier stages and states bubbles up with quite a bit of intensity and we still need to deal with it. Oftentimes that shadow, or maybe you're not just talking about shadow, there's lots of things that can
mm.
um, uh,
Yeah, I'm not so shadow oriented.
yeah.
So
What I
I
was what I was gonna
mm,
say is the shadow can grow up too, right? With the shadow actually can grow up to later developmental levels, and then we need to sort that out. But even from a different perspective, right? It's just whatever emotions we haven't processed or whatever we haven't gotten sorted out from an early
mm,
level bubbles up with even more intensity. And I notice as I'm listening to you, I wonder, as somebody who's pioneering the leading edge of consciousness, right? It's like the farther you go, the later you go, the less people there are who can hold us and support us. So I wonder how you've navigated that personally as you keep going later and having things dealt with earlier. It's oftentimes really helpful to have people who
Mm.
can hold us. So I wonder how you've been with yourself in that.
So I actually, and it's something some people criticize about me, is I haven't worked with many like teachers or coaches and spiritual mentors. So I mostly did things by myself. Um, yeah, I think there are several factors that support it, and I guess that's something in the developmental domain. It oftentimes doesn't happen so much because when you look at the integral model or so, certain traditions like Christianity or Enlightenment philosophy or even things like Plato are highly devalued. So as something from a very early stage. And I would say what actually helped me a lot is knowing these traditions and spending a lot of time with philosophy, which gave me sort of an overlay for all the stages that I grew through. It always gave me some security to make sense and meaning of it and deal with certain things that came up. And the other thing is time. So I guess that's something many people don't have is the time because they maybe go through school, then they study, then they go into work. And I took off a lot of time to simply be with myself and process the stuff that comes up and look for different opinions and different perspectives on anything and everything. Not seeing the need to rush myself into some worldly success in a sense. And so on the one hand, that's a great incident or something that luckily happened to me that during my business studies I somehow dropped so far out of the material realm or the realm of the competition that was present throughout the doing the degree. Um, and looking for more sorts of material success and not feeling well received by the professors and so on. So that I sort of started to distance myself from all my earlier needs and took more and more into reading and studying philosophy and spirituality. And I mean, there were many periods where I was simply completely confused for months or even half a year or a year, but I simply stood with it. So there was no escapism from the challenges. I just explored them, stayed with them until they naturally resolved through the input I got and the progress I made. So there's a lot of self-study and self-observation and reflection. And at the same time, I was always, at least to a degree, grounded in very normal and natural relationships, like working in the pub and having contact with hundreds of people every week, so that I didn't lose contact to humanity, which I guess is very important as well. And then meeting my wife and getting children. So there's always some counterbalance within the growth that happened, luckily. So I didn't actively look for it or seek it, but it showed up and made itself present. And so I tend to these things. And I guess that's one of the ones of importance. So I'm not sure with the later stages and how much shadow work we actually need, or how much of it is simply just another perspective and so on, given that we have a lack of comparison and therefore a lack of ability to actually judge what's good, and we don't have the historic timeline to see what's actually working out and whatnot. It's very difficult to say what's the right path within the later realms. And yeah, as far as I can tell, much of what happens when we've gone beyond a certain threshold is much simpler and much more easily available and feels much more healthy in itself. And I guess that's something we see in the spiritual traditions as well, like Saint Teresa, when you move into the sixth mansion of the interior castle, so the later states, the more unitive or witnessing states, then we connect to some sense of overarching goodness. And that's something you find in Plato as well, the idea of the good. So when you connect to these later realms, there seems to be some navigating principle, um, which likely relates to your ground of well-being that actually tends to show you what's good and true, beautiful. And when we stay with it, it starts to naturally resolve certain issues. So if there is some, whatever emotional topic within the heart, and one just stays with the later states, it will, with time, simply align and get into a more mediated version of it and will integrate with the trajectory and try to heal itself. So there's some likewise some natural principle of healing in the system, I guess. It becomes stronger the more we grow up, so that we have less difficulties. Yet at the same time, there is much of the psychological dynamics still there. As I said, like recognizing that there's one realm that's successful and where life satisfaction is high, and another realm where it's the opposite. And given that these realms are still active, there can be some sort of repression happening or splitting off, as you say, shadow stuff. But I guess most of it is actually happening within the earlier layers between mind and life, where you have a lot of psychodynamic things going on. When you grow beyond this, I guess the things become much more lighter and in itself more self-revealing of where we should head and how things should work out. But in retrospect, I would really say that continental philosophy was my best guide. And it's sadly something that's highly devalued. So in the integral realm, as coming from a very early stage and being only about reasoning and simple thought processes, there is much more going on there. And the same is Christianity. So,
And what more is going on there? I mean, if I imagine if Forrest, the listener, could be listening to this and going, okay, Roman, so you're telling me to read some philosophy, right? Like help me,
yeah.
what am I reading for? Or help me. It's like when I'm listening to you,
Mm,
there's something underneath that I experience you in contact with that's illuminating more of the territory of reality. Is that resonant?
mm. Yeah, we can look at a simple example. For example, Kierkegaard, Søren Kierkegaard, it's a Danish philosopher. Some consider him as the founder of psychology, um, early 19th century, I would say, to late to mid 19th century. So he died very young, and in part he was Christian and a sort of Platonic philosopher. And he had a simple stage model that I bumped in quite early, so at 2021. And he has only three stages. And the first one is aesthetic, the second one is ethic, and the third one is religious. And when I read him, so at age late 20, early 21, I had to consider where to go in my life. So, shall I just continue as I did, or shall I go studying business administration? What's hindering me to do so? And I recognized within his writing that I was somehow engaged with the aesthetic stage of being. So there you have a simple ideal that you follow. It for me was something like the Übermensch, or just saying yes to life in whatever way it shows up, which to justify a lot of hedonism and strange things that other people would judge as unethical, so to say. And then when you read such a philosopher that in detail elaborates on the transition from the aesthetic through the ethic, where you simply make a choice for the good and decide to navigate a certain path, even so you feel anxiety and not see anxiety as a threat, but as a signpost for your own freedom and liberation that shows you where you actually feel that you could step beyond yourself and lose yourself because you step beyond your boundaries. Then it's quite easy to make the transition, and because of the person having gone through it themselves and having elaborated on some of the difficulties, the pitfalls to get resolved. Like there are tons of people that just stay within the threshold through to liberation. So the fear of freedom, I guess that's what Erich Fromm said, and just get stuck in anxiety or not liberating themselves. But if you have a philosopher who shows you exactly what happens within yourself, shows you exactly what you have to do to resolve the tension, how to step into liberation, then it's getting quite simple. And so later on, I rediscovered him again, and then so I suddenly recognized, okay, he's not just propagating stepping from the aesthetic to the ethical life, so cherishing one's freedom and making moral choices and trying to grow. But he said there is some next level, so the religious altitude, or he wrote about either or, that we are entrapped in this either ethical or aesthetical being, either just fulfilling our needs and wishes or living through a moral codex and developing, even so we don't have a reason to develop towards something good or more encompassing as a human being. And there he showed that it's about a dialectical balance between both types. So not repressing the one and cherishing the other, but having them in dialogue and co-explore each other and enrich them and utilize them for growth and finding an actual reason why we should be ethical and aesthetical. And that gave me, for example, likewise a hint how to grow up and how to make sure, um, especially in the recognition of being some sort of split personality, as we said in the beginning, that different aspects of oneself are engaged differently at different times and react differently to different contexts and value different things. And yeah, a lot of Western philosophy deeply embodies the developmental trajectory and ways to work with oneself as they were lonely or so on top of anyone else, I assume, 200, 300 years ago, that they had to resolve a lot of things with themselves. And so they deliver very nuanced and complex practices to deal with one's own psyche and to grow up and to integrate and resolve tensions.
Mhm.
And much of what they discovered is today in psychology, like parts work and looking at shadows and understanding repression and the unconscious and these things. I guess reading these people gives one internal skills and capacities that to a degree make another less necessary. But I guess that's a highly challengeable assumption that I propagate. But at least for me, it was the way it worked, and I never or hardly ever felt really drawn to some teacher or psychologist or anyone on the outside. So I have to mention I did my first very lasting therapy was 19, I guess. So I did some some work on my personality quite early, which might too have fed into growing up more smoothly maybe than others.
I mean, it can be tough to do. I didn't start going to see a therapist really until I was in my 20s, and then I would end up giving them therapy essentially. I mean, I would be in the therapist's office.
Mm.
I would ask them a question, and I would just have these moments of like, "Oh, your worldview cannot hold my worldview. Like my worldview is bigger than your worldview." It's just like, "Oh, this is crazy," right? Um,
Yeah, that's too an experience. So at a later point, I tried therapists again, and I mean, the one wanted to medicate me because I had some strange visions at this point. And then I first brain scan, and then okay, there was nothing obviously going on in my brain that looked abnormal, but nevertheless, medication seemed the way forward. And then the other one, I mean, so she was experienced with stage development and worked with some of the well-known models. It felt like they just wanted to project some of their her own topics and conceptions and things she sees with her patients into my childhood, and then just generate some sort of turbulence within things that I had tidily put together in a functional, healthy story for myself. So where does it get more distracting and unhealthy than supporting? That's, I guess, an important question. Even if they are developmental aware and so on. I guess that's what you need to
it's not even necessarily neutral either. It can actually be really harmful,
explain.
right? Working with
Yeah.
working with someone who's projecting on us and creating universes where there aren't any, and uh,
Mm.
yeah.
I guess with the psyche, one has to keep it simple. I mean, it's I don't have the word. So versatile, is it versatile? Yeah, it's very capable to make up mirages and illusions and stories. And the later we get, the more joyful it can be to just roam around within some internal worlds and make up some psychoanalytic stuff about ourselves. And we can easily get lost in these things. And then when we have someone on the outside who is trained for seeing patterns and creating creative stories about what's going on within you, or asking questions that get you more engaged. So then you can like spend endless amounts of time just within yourself and making up things.
And like really fleshing out neural pathways that are not useful and
Yeah, maybe they make you a good writer in the end, like
yeah,
write an
turn
autobiography or
into a good screenplay.
screenplay. Yeah.
It sounds like Roman, what I'm in, I asked about the what was underlying philosophy, and it sounds what I'm getting when I'm listening to you is okay. You philosophers is the name we use for people who studied the nature of reality and
Mm,
nature of experience. And you went and read a bunch of philosophers and got to see, okay, here's all these different people's experience of studying experience. And then through that, there's a pattern recognition behind that of the types of maneuvers or the mechanics that happen through development. And through that, becoming aware of a pattern of evolution
mm,
that moves through the people who are studying evolution and studying consciousness and studying the nature of experience, and that could create some kind of updraft or and architecture for a more stable, robust experience at a later stage that's
mm,
grounded in research on the luminaries through history. Is that how's that to hear?
Yeah, and it's very much what I did with my model. So it's so when you want to study human development and you need a huge data set, but it's not easy to get the research data of other people. So I reached out to some of the developmental psychologists and the luminaries in these disciplines and asked them for data to make sense of it by myself. But of course, they didn't give away their data for free or at all because they, on the one hand, had some ethical criteria, but on the other hand, I guess it's something about power and um, economics. So I guess it's there are many conflicts of interest, and so I ended up simply assessing philosophers and looking how their lives developed um, because they were very productive and most of them had many ruptures in their life. And so I simply first sorted books with the ruptures that like secondary literature sees, and then reading through it and simply recapitulating how it feels in my own energy system. And by this, the same trajectory showed up with all of them, basically.
Hmm.
And yeah, from feeling it on the inside, I could start to look at the text and see, okay, is there some pattern? Is there some grammar? Is there some complexification of thought that always moves along the same trajectory? And yeah, that brought me to build a model that has a different foundation in a sense than all other models because they are built on, yeah, individuals, huge amount of individuals that were scored instead of actually looking at the growth that has been shown in history, but not in a sort of collective way that it has been done by Gebser, Wilbur, and Graves, but in a very individually focused way to better understand how humans evolve, how human psyche grows. And that likewise to shows then how all these philosophers can be used to support psychological growth and development. And in a sense, I guess a healthy integration of the trajectory. And the other advantage that I see is that when you build with individuals, you just see like it's just a little window into their lives with maybe a sentence completion test where you see 36 things a person says about reality at a certain stage, and then you have fluctuations in it. So you get a person at a certain stage within a sentence completion test, and then maybe you have six actual notions about this stage versus looking at the life work of a philosopher delivers you so much more. I mean, a 300, 500, 600-page book shows you a rich spectrum, how they grow into a stage in different domains and different fields of thought. You see the overarching models they create. You can see the differences between models much more as you see many, many more models and facets of them. And so I guess overall it creates a much more holistic understanding of how growth happens. And it's yeah, less yeah, I guess. So it has many advantages. But it's of course tough to read some of the German philosophers and French and English and oftentimes you have the translation problem. Like if you're in the US and you only speak English, you won't get a nice version of Immanuel Kant, for example. So you get a very reduced and more sellable, I guess, sellable version of his philosophy. Most of the complexity is eradicated and meaning is completely different. So which is some sort of the advantages that one has in Europe.
That's fascinating that the developmental level of the translator of the text coming through is
Mm. Yeah, especially in older texts where they had no punctuation. So Kant had very long and nuanced and complex clauses to show how everything is connected within the human being, within the human mind, and across the different levels from the senses to the abstractions to the meaning-making apparatus. And when you so they broke these things down, but when you look further back into past where they had no punctuation, like Plato or Aristotle and the Christian Church Fathers. You can have a book where sometimes you have clauses that are a page long and they just didn't figure out how to best punctuate them. And and sometimes you read the same text and it sounds super simple, and so that which makes it somewhat difficult to actually research these things and say where they were actually at through grammatical analysis, but I mean the meaning making and stuff. But it's, yeah, that's why we have punctuation, because the church fathers, they were so pissed off that everyone just put the dots between the clauses the way they liked, and by this changed the meaning and their complexity. And so they thought we have to find a way to make clear how we meant a certain clause. And that's, yeah, and I guess it's important to figure out development, to have people like show themselves what sort of complexity they want to express and can express, versus like the translator, the punctuator, who enforces a different meaning and complexity in reality.
There's a few curiosities that I'm noticing in this moment. The one that's most luminous is you said the word beyond many times in this podcast recording.
Really.
At least that's my experience is I've
Mm.
heard the word beyond a bunch, and um, I'm curious to explore beyondness. Something over here wants to have a chuckle about how many times I've claimed to have experienced beyond, only to find a beyond the beyond I've claimed is the beyond. But I just I'd be curious to,
Mm.
yeah, unpack beyond together.
Yeah, let's see. I mean, there's some. I mean, I speak just in the flow, so I'm not super hermeneutically nuanced, I guess. So beyond, of course, is some like it's sort relativistic thing. So when I speak about beyond, I guess at least sometimes in the last minutes and so, it likely was from the reference point of my model. So I say a certain philosopher is actually beyond what we consider them to be. Within, for example, integral theory, where Kant is like 3.5 or an achiever orange rational being. And then I think, okay, he's beyond because he is much more constructible or unitive in a sense than people want to see. And that's where I, of course, introduce a sort of hierarchy and say something is beyond. I guess that's at least one of the things you recognized. And that's a reference point, and that, of course, strongly connects to my sense of capability to assess these things more accurate than others. I mean, which is the only reason why I would stick with my model. If I would have the sense that other models would be more accurate, then I would stop talking about my assessments and I would continue to develop it, to move beyond, move beyond my own, beyond my own limitations, as I try to do within a sort of actual realm of business and so on. Which again is a different sense of beyond, where it's not so much about a beyond in terms of stages, where it's more a beyond in terms of capacities. So where skill sets are inadequate. And so there's a learning curve that's not necessarily growing up. So it might be in the terms of skills that move along the stage trajectory, but more beyond, going beyond one's limitations in skill sets and understanding a certain object or process or phenomenon at a certain stage within a certain realm, which of course is a different process of transcending than moving beyond a certain altitude, which, yeah. And then when I think of beyond, what's beyond? And there's the other part of beyond, I guess. Beyond, for example, time and space. And so beyondness, that's spiritual in a sense. That might not even feel beyond, but it's, I guess the human mind uses the word beyond because it feels transcendent, even if it's immanent, like even if it touches one's interiority, it has a sense of coming from beyond, which might relate to some natural hierarchy, or it's simply whatever, beyond.
There's I wonder if you could help me with meaning making or something about this because there was when I can remember years ago when I first started having experiences beyond space and time, and there was a real distinction of like, okay, I'm exiting the universe, I'm exiting space and time, and I'm resting in awareness, observing space and time. And people often talk about getting ejected out of their body and having
Mm,
those out of body experiences, and there was a real distinction between that kind of beyond of resting in awareness and
mm,
being in the body. And then I remember more recently, maybe 2 years ago, doing after doing so much of this
mm,
ground well-being work and um, uh, doing this uh, growing down process. Right. It was like I went to this breathwork thing where a guy did a breathwork activation, and every single person he did it with would eject from their body and be in
mm,
resting in the divine, and then come back and go, "Oh my God, I had this experience of being home," and they were in tears and no, no, no.
mm,
And I'm watching all of them go through this experience, and I'm like, okay, I've had this experience a million times. I'm excited to have it again. You know what I mean? Like, let's do it.
mm,
And I sit down and we do the whole breathwork thing. And it was like in the moment that I would launch, that I would have the moment of launching, it was like, oh,
mm,
there's nowhere to go. Like that is here
mm,
now. There, whatever that gap was
mm,
between here and now and the timeless boundless has been uh married and
mm,
they're not two anymore. Uh, so it was like heaven's not out there out of space and time. Heaven
mm.
here in this moment. And so I wonder, yeah, I wonder how what happens for you hearing that.
Yeah, it sounds great.
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah, yeah, it's sounds non-dual in a sense. I guess that's what some people call it when you manage to hold both together, the beyondness and so the transcendent and the immanent and these things. And yeah, how is it for you? Does it feel better than before, or how is it?
Mm, language can be really challenging for me here. It sometimes feels like I can make more of a mess with words than I can offer anything useful. Uh, sometimes, being with you in a question like this, I might actually take several minutes to respond in a way where I could say something that is helpful.
Mm,
And I don't know
mm,
if our listeners want to be here for that. Maybe they do. Hmm. I I am sort of rewinding time here and just going, okay, I asked that question because you were speaking about these different
Mm,
expressions of beyond, for lack of a better way to put it, the different definitions of beyond or different ways we can experience
mm,
beyondness in um like in overcoming question mark in becoming more than we were in capacity building, right? In realizing more of who we are in capacity building, and then more vertically beyond in the sense of getting beyond space and time, perhaps. Um, and perhaps then there was a third one. There was a third
mm.
beyond that you mentioned as well.
Yeah. The from the perspective of a model, being beyond, going beyond, learning,
Yeah,
and the beyondness in the spiritual dimension.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. And so it's I am checking my impulse to share the experience that I just shared and ask for your views on it comes from this sense of, what was at one point so beyond, then becoming, I don't know, for lack of a better way to put it, so not beyond.
mm,
Um, and then there being new beyonds. I mean, of course, I've had many,
mm,
many experiences in the last few years since the moment I'm speaking about, that I would judge or call as beyond
mm,
that experience. And so there just keep being beyonds beyond
mm.
beyond.
Yeah, I mean, in stage terms, that's of course a thing. There are many beyond. So I haven't felt like I went beyond anything in the last years, last 2 years maybe. But there's this beyond. So when we lift into a certain stage, it first might feel like a beyond. So I guess that's for folks who are familiar with stages in interior film. They notice that a stage first shows up as a sort of state, and then it can be being lifted beyond one's current perspective, especially if consciousness starts to build in. Like normally, if we have a state, as far as I perceive it, it's at first not actually consciousness that comes in, but it's sort of modifying our experience. For example, if we have a very traditional experience of the beyond, it can feel like the beyond comes in as the divine, either as a messenger, as an image, or just someone you're having an internal discourse with. So you're not actually having a consciousness of a place where the divine originates, as Sri Aurobindo describes. So when you move into later stages, you actually see the place where the gods originate or something like that. So that's not what we have if we move into a new state first. But when the next state becomes more conscious, then we can have a sense of beyondness at first. So we look down on our early experience and seem that it's not all there is. We might get confused, might have to figure out where we are now and um, find new concepts, new control mechanisms, new generalizations to then move ahead. And on the other hand, what I sense to hear likewise is this difference between being transcendent and being immanent. And so at first, when we tap into the later realms or states, it can feel like the witness is moving beyond and we are looking down at ourselves or it's behind. And if we experience it more often, it can sometimes feel as if it was one. So and there are of course many different ways one can experience it. So I'm currently more with the traditional Christian thing because we did it in the course. There can first be a feeling, okay, someone is guiding my thoughts. So God is coming in and sending me a thought, and I can respond. or it can feel like the beyondness, the divine is actually the voice within oneself. So there is no distinction between one's own voice and God. So the beyond and the immediate reality are completely fused in, yeah, I mean, in a more visionary thinking. We might lose connection to the body and time and space and so on, but we still feel completely immersed and present and at once with all that's arising, even if it does feel more like divine than our actual human thought. And so there's two way that we can break the distinction between beyond and what's actually going on. And, and that's what I sensed what you were speaking about. And of course, the more experienced we are in meditation and with certain breathing techniques, the less likely is it that we only sense the beyond, but get a more holistic experience of these things, coalescing and being seamlessly unified, which at the same time, I'm not sure if that's something for you, it feels good, but for me, it sometimes feels like a deep sadness, like, why can't I feel beyond anymore?
Mhm.
Why is it so mundane? And then some aspect of an earlier stage comes up. Oh, it was so profound the first time of feeling beyond, or the first time of seeing an angel or an entity or
Mhm.
whatever.
Mhm.
And now it's just
Yeah.
I can't even judge anymore whether it's something spiritual or whether it's whether I completely lost it. So it can feel like more profound and at the same time more like a dark night or a loss. So it's what I deal a lot with, sadly. When I do a course and then all participants say, okay, it was great, amazing, and I had these experiences and so on. And I say, okay, I prepared it and I wasn't sure. I had tons of visions in my preparation time, but I couldn't even tell if it's that what I actually wanted to accomplish from remembering my past and transferring the profound experience that I had in the past at a certain state or stage into the course and for you. And so there's this sort of loss of parameter, loss of realistic estimates what something can mean for another human being or for oneself. So it's a sad thing, but at the same time, it seems to be part of the epitome of spiritual development to no longer see the distinction, the distance, um, lose a bit of the sense of profundity, and therefore sort of can live more as a bodhisattva, maybe, because we are no longer attached to spirituality, no longer seeking for our lust or pleasure or liberation. Then there's nothing left but ordinary reality that we have to sort of, or should or can, or whatever, make better for the mass of humanity, that there's less suffering and maybe more people wake up and peak to later stages and find more joy, and maybe everything gets better for the majority of human beings, even if there's nothing beyond completely immanent realm.
Yeah, the more you're speaking, Roman, the more I'm coming into contact with emptiness.
I hope not in a too negative way. So I feel quite empty now, and I know that when I move too much into the emptiness side, into the nirvana or cessation of things, then it's this sort of lessness of all things becomes dominant. Life is, in a sense, meaningless or timeless and spaceless. selfless and all these things, and this can feel negative, but at the same time, I mean, it's the profound liberation that can make us do more for reality,
Yeah.
I guess, and be more skillful in making meaning as we lose these things a bit. How is it for you? How's it?
I'm present to how many different ways I can respond to this question, and the what I want to name is how easy, I'm not sure easy is the right word, how good I am at bypassing and staying out in emptiness and the timeless and avoiding contact with what's often in the physical body stored down in the legs and the hip flexors and the pelvis, and uh, dealing with the more mundane
Mm,
things. In a human experience, it might be paying taxes or sending an invoice or cleaning my room or whatever it is.
mm,
But that's been actually a territory of delight for me these last years, is really the mystical and the mundane, and like the not only being the timeless, boundless being holding the universe, but also being
mm,
Forrest, this completely normal human being who's held by the divine and
mm.
exists in space and time.
Yeah, and I nevertheless still have preferences for certain things. Like I did build a raised bed today, and so I first thought it's so challenging. I thought it comes like an IKEA piece where you can put everything together, but it was just a lot of wood. And then, of course, I recognize, damn, what did I do? But then I started, and then I get into flow, and now it's almost finished. Just in 4 hours of work and screwing holes and whatever. And I still have preferences. But when I start doing taxes and so it just flows. It just feels like it's part of it and perfect.
Yeah.
Yet
Yeah.
it's still like, okay, it's not so fine to deal with bureaucratic systems, and you could handle this easier, dear government.
And that's perfect too. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's what's the word you use for that? Like that is that also. Like that is such.
yeah. So yeah, suchness, or in this simplest way, okayness, but this oftentimes get people confused with the Finder's course, where okayness is pretty much the beginning of awakening. I guess that's quite early, like the first jhana in Buddhism. There's my 3.1 stage, where if you have an autonomous state where things just can feel joyful and okay. So it's difficult. What's the right language? So suchness, yeah, okayness, bliss, and then it depends. So there's more flow, divine flow happening, or it just feels meaningful and whole and down without limitations, limitless, and just just what it is.
Yeah, it's intriguing to me. So what I heard you say is you haven't had an experience of beyond in years, and it sounded like what you said is you haven't had a new experience in a couple of years. Is that what I heard? You haven't had a new experience in a couple of years?
Yeah, I think the last huge change. So it's not that long. So I guess I over it's 1 year 3 months, maybe 1 year 7 months probably, where I feel super stable.
Hmm.
And it feels like it's over, but I mean I thought this in the past already, but it's yeah. So for me, it feels more, it's just um, bringing things down. The descent versus the ascent is all that's left in a sense.
The descend versus the ascend is all that's left.
Hmm. And in this, of course, there is I get more nuances and I start to get things that I didn't get in the past. So when I do the course, for example, and I recapitulate all the states, I always learn something about these things, but it always feels like an object. So it always feels like something that's known and I can perfectly reflect on. It's nothing that's coming out of, yeah, like in the past, I meditated and suddenly, bam, everything is opening up and then a vision comes and now it's, okay, I'm doing meditation. Okay, there's a vision. It came from there and I fabricated timelessness and boundlessness through this and that. And so it always feels a bit like there is nothing actually new happening in terms of objects and consciousness, but it's of course a learning and discovering more deeply what's possible and what I'm actually capable of or what I bypassed. Because I mean, many of the traditions say, whether it's Christian or Buddhist, don't get stuck with visions, for example. And that's just because it was in my course the last topic that it's present. And so always when I had a vision, saw an entity coming in, recognized how I could sort of channel or support some form of mystical grace in me. I said, okay, that's not the ultimate. So that's still a form of separation from the divine, from nirvana or whatever, depending on the tradition. And so I, in part, stepped ahead. So especially in the later realm, and now I see that there is much more in these things in part that I did overlook. So, so I spent much more time with so the mental stuff, but when it went beyond it, was much faster. And, and turning back to the beginning, it felt, yeah, especially too because it felt less like all the stuff that happens in the mind was figuring out what's healthy and what are the right narratives to unpack things and make meaning of it and integrate different voices. All these complexities were not that present, so it's much more uh, mystical in a sense. And that likewise, many traditions that I guess came from down there maybe meant it's no longer that significant. So we can just sort of look at it with some disengagement and move on. Even so, I developed a lot of skills. That's still there's much to unpack and discover.
As I'm listening to you, I notice I wonder if you're bored, actually.
Really,
Um,
I sometimes think that I'm bored, and much of my experience had to do, I guess, with boredom in part. So I looked at things and it felt like, yeah, I know it somehow, or there was a sense of, okay, doesn't seem so important. So often, so it's whether that's something that was conditioned into me or whether there's some, but it often felt like it's too known for me to spend much time with it. And then you had the traditions that too said, go beyond it. It doesn't matter so much. So sometimes there was a sense of boredom within in the process. But when I'm actually engaged with it, especially working with people, then there's no boredom or something. It's just surely. How do you sense the boredom?
Well, I'm struck by the last thing you said. The way I'm paraphrasing you, but the way it landed in me is like the passion for me right now is supporting people. That's where I feel, yeah, lit up. That's how it landed in me. It,
Have you ever feel bored?
what's that?
Have you ever feel boredom?
Of course. Yeah, of course. I mean, there's distinctions here because when in one moment we were talking about the feeling of feeling complete or feeling done, and I know this one. I know this one in my own way. I don't know if it's the same
Mm,
experience you're having, but I certainly know what it's like to feel like done. And just like, okay, kind of like, especially when you can have, you were talking about earlier, cessation experiences, like especially when you kind of find the light switch and can
mm,
turn off experience. It's like, wow, just total cessation. And I would call that quite different. I would make a distinction between
mm,
boredom.
mm,
Yeah. And I know what it's like to feel bored, and it's intriguing because I wonder. This is my construction, of course, but I wonder how
mm,
much of the boredom comes from um, like understimulation of I can feel really bored when it's like I have so much to offer in the world and the challenges that I'm dealing with or um, contexts I'm navigating are not difficult enough to really challenge me.
mm,
Like it's like I could lift 300 pounds, but there's only 100-pound weights in this gym. Like I can do a little workout, but
mm,
I can't get a real I can't
mm,
get a real workout here. Um, and uh, and just feeling like there's a certain kind of turmoil that I've experienced of having gifts to share in the world and not being able to bring them and feeling incredibly bored, like sitting around and going, especially in the awareness of, um,
mm,
especially in the awareness of like, oh, for example, on my side, I oftentimes am like, I want to bring together um, people and facilitate conversations that are going to have
mm,
really positive ripples in the world, right? I want to do transformational work that's going to have impact on planetary systems and on the evolutionary trajectory of humanity. And right now I got to get up all day and spend time getting myself into the position where I can do that kind of work. So I'm
mm.
not doing what I actually want to be doing. I'm doing the things necessary to create the conditions to be able to do what I actually want to be doing. And it can be like, God, it's so boring.
And then you needs to then the person needs to read some Tao Te Ching or whatever. What is
But
it? The way is the goal. No.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah.
and there's all kind. I
Mm,
mean, we could unpack that for a whole podcast.
mm.
There's so much in there. Um, and I have no idea if that's the kind of boredom you're talking about at all. Um,
No, no. Yeah, and I think yeah, what I recognize it. So it's not only in part there was some boredom, but it's I guess it's to the curiosity of the beyondness is larger than the curiosity about the object.
uh-huh.
So and I guess there's this duality which I guess shows up in yours too. So the curiosity and the engagement with the actual outcome dealing with clients, moving the needle within collective processes and complex systems is a more engaging fantasy than all the steps on the way. So I guess in the sense that there's some similarity and overlap between the ideas.
Yeah, there's I mean, I think we could record an entire podcast just
Mm,
unpacking the ego structures that are behind everything I just said. Um, there's a lot in that
mm,
that we could work with. Um, and then I also hear you speaking about the. It sounds like what I'm hearing you say is this. I want to make sure I'm getting you here. So you're speaking about a boredom of um, in the relationship between beyondness and objects, and a boredom of um, it's almost like it's almost like hitting it's almost like hitting the upper limit of the boundless. It's almost hitting a boundary in
mm,
the boundless of I don't know. It reminds me of the transpersonal awareness when you. I don't think this is what you're saying,
mm,
but I don't think this is what you're saying. But what it reminds me
mm.
of, like when you.
Yeah, but I know the other type of boredom as well. So when I'm understimulated, so it's the flow theory. So when life hardly moves into the realm where anxiety arises.
Uh-huh,
So the strongest feeling might be nervousness
uh-huh,
in front of a podcast, but there's not something that can over challenge you. But it's yeah, moving the needle towards not towards boredom, but towards beyond. What is it? Beyond boredom and anxiety and stuff. Yeah, I know this as well. Even so, I don't know it. So in these situations, I mean, things are always give some challenge, but I know it, and and in part, I guess it's too with the going beyond. So when you look at an angel, so tells you stuff, it's bright and things. At the same time, okay, what is it good for when you know there's something beyond? So there is this sort of tension, I guess, in it as well. So you can have the most blissful experience. But if someone tells you it's not the ultimate, there can be boredom, or the boredom can come because it happened too often, or it was known, like if there's reincarnation, for example, and you moved from stage X to Y dozens of lifetimes, if we use a Buddhist doctrine, then yeah, of course, everything looks known. So you transcend as fast as you can and then continue with your bodhisattva vow that hinders you to leave reality. But I'm not sure if that's, I mean, an actual reality, but it's an option. So that's sometimes how it felt to me. So in retrospect, so there's of course the other story that I shared, that philosophers and their wisdom helped me grow, and they too were somehow, I mean, frustrated with life and sometimes so beyond that they saw things more illusion-like and imperfect, maybe, and maybe at the same time, as you say, not with the means to actually change it, but seeing the perfect outcome, but not actually walking the track of change of reality, so that they might have been in this sort of boredom or frustration with reality as well, so that these things transmit. So that sometimes when I consider why I grew up and why I disengaged with so many objects, so I now engage completely, and I did a lot, is how much of their actual sort of wisdom was not wisdom, but frustration with reality. And you have these dichotomies, like Schopenhauer was a great influencer for me, and his parents were like millionaires, so he never had to actually work. But at the same time, his philosophy devalues money and richness and stuff. These contradictions where you absorb philosophy from people that doesn't even necessarily reflect the life and make certain aspects of reality look less significant because they came out of a context where they never had to actually deal with it. So this can, of course, um, write one's own life into sort of tracks that are within our current reality more dysfunctional. But of course, you have uh, spiritual seekers that dropped all of their possessions because they sensed it as illusion and not that important. So there's this whole dynamic as well going on. So I normally don't think it's boredom, but sometimes, yeah.
It sounds like there might be some component of the grieving of the magical. Like it's when we first hit a new wave or when we first hit a new stage or state, there's a magic to it. It's new. It's like, oh, here's an angel, right? For example, to use your
Mm,
um,
yeah.
concept, um, but then there's a grieving of wow, what was magic is now normal, right? I've experienced this so many times that
Mm,
it's not new. It's
that's true, yeah. It's true thing.
it's not this crazy thing anymore. It's just completely normal. And
Mm,
there's a grief in that of, if I show somebody else this, they're gonna go, "Oh my God,
mm,
this is what people talk about. It's the craziest thing." And that's what I used to do the first time
mm,
I had the experience, but now I've had this so many times.
mm,
It's not like that anymore. I think I feel like there's some
mm,
texture of boredom of like, yeah, I've seen this before.
mm. Yeah, and that's why I never looked actually so much at teachers. So I saw them and they were elaborating on something they put profundity into it, and I always said, okay, doesn't sound so profound. Is it, or why do they elaborate on? So yeah, I don't go there because
There's
Andrew
a lot
couldn't
of
die.
there's a lot of enthusiasm.
Yeah, and then I always wondered why, how is it possible? And, or is it only a sales trick? So that's where I said, okay, I have to value certain experience more in order to, I have to tell people how profound certain things are. So if not, they don't get it. Is it only this? Do some spiritual teachers actually hold very like simple and general experiences as such profound things that they, I mean, there's this thing and yeah, a lot of things with boredom, and there's of course this boredom like with situations that under challenge, and sometimes it's seen the same pattern repeat in a certain person, and you predict it and tell them, okay, please do it this time like this, and they just do it the same way, and the same outcome appears. And so there's some sort of boredom with reality when you see how it will turn out, yet you're maybe too distant to actually influence it, like in politics.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then it feels like, yeah, watching the same soap opera the hundredth time, and which I guess is to something with IQ, and like people with higher IQ and intelligence feel more bored with things and seek more novelty. And so I guess there's something as well.
Yeah, and I mean, as you're speaking now, Roman, the like trauma is coming up for me, right? And pattern. It's like when we're in pattern or when we're in um, unresolved material, like when we're in residual, we're just having the same experience over and over again, maybe with
Mm,
slightly different seasoning or something, but we're just in a routine or in a pattern versus newness versus like an emergence or a new moment.
mm,
Again, I'm not claiming I'm capturing everything
mm.
you're saying here, but
Yeah,
that might
which too is something we can generate like the newness. So today I assumed I could have a nice, so I had a plan for doing an EEG to meditate and capture data on my brain states simultaneously. And then I planned to work on the outline of a video and stuff. And then my son got sick tonight. He's 1 year, 2 months, and suddenly coughs and has temperature. And then I wake up in the morning and I have my life plan. So my plan, and I think, okay, I now have to deal with a 1 year old. This will, I mean, it will be difficult. I have to grow down from my plan that happens here into my sensory realm. And then as long I'm in this tension with, okay, I deal with something that's too simple, I can feel something like, okay, will be underwhelming and maybe it will be boring. But then there's this sort of process of seeking into the situation and finding um, the edge where it's good for both of us, for him and me, even if it means sacrificing my complex mental whatever ideas about what Roman should look like today and should do and should generate an outcomes for the larger audience of reality and the possible impact that I could have one day. And so then it's but then it's fun, then it's flow, then at a certain point and then it's no longer boring. So there's some sort of where we can shift the needle ourselves to some degree every time. So find novelty in the situation, the pleasure, especially if it's influenceable. So some people are not so influenceable. So if you deal with adults and they just want to get out of their patterns and you can't, one can't do anything.
Well, it's even culturally celebrated to build a routine and
Mm,
get into like the grind in air quotes. I don't know if that's a saying in Europe, but it is in
mm,
US. People talk about the grind and the hustle, and you just
mm.
you plan every moment of your life, and
Yeah, and that leads to desperation. Yeah, I had someone here on Sunday. We did a meditation and I recorded this EEG to see how the meditation actually influences his brain waves to look more like mine. So to just scientifically validate what I'm doing my work. And and that's ironic. So he compared about every day being the same. At the same time, he has a complex organizational conflict with his brother, and they have an organization. But and I'm not a consultant, but I try to, yeah, bring him a bit more into engagement with the situation and look at different and take perspectives on what's going on there. And at the same time, with this huge and complex challenge, he says every day is the same. Like he's in a routine and it's no way to break out. And which is ironical with a really complex challenge at hand that they have in their organization. Yeah, it's strange how people get into routines.
yeah, it's one of the things I sort of loosely keep an eye on is as a marker of well-being is like how much of a routine I'm in and how many new moments are happening, like how much newness is happening is a sign of well-being. That and whether or not I'm singing in the shower. If I go a few days without singing in the shower, something's off. You know what I mean?
It's not what I do, but yeah, yes, sing sometimes to my daughter. But it's like ironic. I can sing to my daughter, but I hardly can sing to my son. Like there is no creativity happening.
Huh, huh.
But we do other stuff that I don't do with my daughter. But it sounds like a good parameter to measure.
Yeah, it's fun to keep an eye on, you know. Okay, well,
Yeah,
maybe that's good for today. Feels like we just ran.
yeah, a little bit. I guess I felt like talking. a bit much in the middle. I
Yeah.
mean, if people get bored, they can end.
Got
end.
bored hearing us talk about photo, and they probably hopped out. Um,
Mm,
yeah. Well, I'll put your website in the show notes so people who are listening can
mm.
find you and we'll get this published. I had a blast. This was great. I had fun. Um,
Great.
yeah, thank yeah, it's always I always enjoy getting to be together, truly. Yeah. So, and I'm definitely like holding a background curiosity of if there are any ways I can support you getting your gifts into the world more. So,
Yeah. I'm not sure. I guess I have to show up to some of your meetings to inquire.
that would probably be supportive. Maybe we could do it all through some sort of telepathy. I'm open to trying. We could just do like a I could Dropbox you something through the field and then you can unpack a zip file and implement it and
Yeah, sometimes feels like this when I do things. So it's and that's to something. Yeah, listening more. Sometimes listening more to the voices that come in.
yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, and thanks to any listeners hanging with us. I'm grateful to you going on this journey with us, and we'll see you in the next episode.
You.